So good morning and welcome back to another Gibbs adventure. And today I want to have a quick chat about fisher and some of the do's and the don'ts. Fisher are kind of an interesting critter. The biggest thing I find with fisher is the guys have trouble turning them, and they let them dry a little bit too much, and then they run into problems when they turn them and that. So this is my catch of fisher for the winter. I think I got one more to put up yet, but anyways, roughly speaking. And a fisher should be, see how this is supple? Okay? The big thing about fisher that the guys struggle with is fleshing them. Every fisher needs to be fleshed, whether it's a female or a male. They have a heavy membrane, not quite as bad as an otter, but close to it. And it's really important to take the time to flesh it on a beam and get that saddle off, because even though you think it's not there, when you flesh it, you'll see there's a layer of fat that's underneath that saddle. And without taking that off, it becomes boardy and very hard to work with, and the grease never really stops coming out of it. So it's not something you want to not do. You want to make sure you always flesh your fisher. With fisher, I always recommend two different boards. A female board that's 4 inches wide, and then again I put the sides on it really quick. You know, mediums and smalls under 25 to 28 is large mediums, and then anything over that is large and extra large. So on the males, all I really do is I use a fox board. That's a fox board. It's a 5 1/4 inch wide board, and it works really good for the males, because when I find trying to put a male on the female board, they're just a little bit too wide, and they don't seem to finish off when you put them on the board. They don't seem to finish quite as nice. So male board. So the other trick I do is I put a line down the center now. It just helps me make sure my tails are nice and straight. Nothing kind of looks worse than when you put something on the board a little bit off and it's sideways, so it just helps in the presentation. So general overall presentation for a fisher. So it's fur out. You're going to dry it fur in, and you want to dry the legs inside, tail opposite of the feet. Okay. You want the bottom lip cut off, those legs inside, and I always pin my ears flat to the head. It just gives it a much nicer looking appearance. And you can see by my catch here, very uniform. Okay. Back in the day, we used to use really wide boards for fisher, and they were short and stout, and it doesn't give as nice an appearance as if you take the time to put it on a narrower board. When you're looking at fisher for fur wise, the females are always a lot more silkier than the males, and the males are coarser fur, heavier, quite a bit bigger. These are all females, of course, on the table. That would be the way it works out. But really important when you put them on the board, fur in, you use a belly wedge. If you don't use a wedge, you're going to have a heck of a time to get it off. And my trick with wedges is to keep my animals nice and flat is I feed the wedge down from the top. So when I put it on the board like this, my wedge is going to go in like that. And then when they dry nice and flat. Okay? So the one thing you're always trying to do with fisher, in a sense, is or any animals, is to have uniformity of the put up. And it takes, you got to be really careful with fisher, because if you over dry them, they're probably almost impossible to turn. You have to re-wet them, and you do that by wrapping them in a wet damp cloth and leaving them for probably half an hour before they'll actually turn for you. So you're better off most cases to turn a fisher a bit early than you are to leave it over dry, because they're just such a heavy leather that they're really stubborn to work with. More guys will split more boards trying to get fisher off the board when they over dry than anything else. But the important thing, again, like I said, is to make sure you flesh everyone and dry it properly. So overnight on the board to maybe 12 hours thereabouts. And in the wintertime, it's going to be different than in the fall or late spring when there's more moisture in the air. But where I live here, in the wintertime, the air is very dry, sucks the moisture out of the pelt really quick, and I can usually turn it easily within 12 hours. When you go a couple of days, if you leave it a couple of days and don't turn it, then you're going to have a lot of trouble. So my suggestion is early instead of late. Now when I turn it, I put it back on the board, I leave the feet inside, and then I'm going to leave it on the board for at least 2 days. At least 2 days. I'm going to pin the ears flat to the head, okay? I'm going to put the belly wedge back in, you know, my wedge is going to go back in here. Because again, if you don't put a wedge on it, you're not going to get it off the board, unless you're using split boards, which is fine. But the only problem why I like the solid boards is I like to keep my width of the animal very consistent. So that's why I always use solid boards. When they're grading fisher, they're going to do by clarity. I don't know if you can see this as well, but this is a pail. You know, regular pail. Now this one is kind of different. It's a pail, but it's yellow. It's got a very casty look to it. So it's really yellow compared to this guy, if you want to do a comparison. Okay, so there's definitely a yellow undertone to this skin. I don't go into a lot of detail in the grading when I make my little videos because it's not really the thing that's important for trappers to worry about. Let the graders figure that out for you. But to suffice to say, when fisher prices were really high, when I was a young fellow, fishers were big bucks because there wasn't a heck of a lot of them around. And guys would find a fisher track and get on the tracks and follow it until they caught the fisher because it'd be like a month's wage for them back in the day. Not so much today. So the market for fisher right now, you know, is it went up a little bit this year, which is good, but it's consistently been around 30 bucks, 35, 40 bucks. A little bit of a spike this year, which is nice to see. Fisher, primarily the usage for them is going to be for females, it's going to be garments, and for the males, it's going to be for trim on fur coats. So they'll use it as a trim or on a parka of some sort. They can use the males, it's a coarser fur, and they'll use it for trim. In this market that we're facing right now, all the fish are pretty well being used for trim, and so size is important right now. So your males all of a sudden are bringing more than the females, which is not usually characteristically normal in a fisher market, but that's what it is. Fisher, as a species of where it usually ends up in the world, it usually goes to Russia and they make garments out of it. So the females, like I said, are a lot silkier and softer, so they went to the garments, and the males being coarser would end up being, you know, like a ruff on a parka or a trim somewhere on a parka. So there you go. Okay, so just to show you an example, these are two females that were skinned and everything, and the guy did a good job, but he didn't flesh them. And this is, you can almost tell, so when I squeeze it, you can't hear any crinkling noise to it because I know the saddle's still on it. Whereas one of mine, when you squeeze the belly, you hear that right away. It's thinner. And what happens is when they dry, they end up getting all crinkly and turned and everything. So, you know, if you're going to buy something, which one do you want to buy? You know? So this just one of the reasons I try to explain to the guys all the time that fisher need to be fleshed. These are females that weren't fleshed, and you can tell right away. Now the other thing that's really important, and I keep harping on this in all my videos, is brushing your fur. So, you know, this is just a dog slicker brush, and it just helps to get everything lined up nice and neat. The better that you can send in a product to somewhere, the nicer looking it looks, the better you're going to do on the fur price. You know, it's the old adage where you can't take a $5 pelt and make it a $100 pelt, but you sure as heck take a lot of $100 pelts and turn them into $5 pelts because they're not put up properly. And in the case of fisher, of course, you know, the females are going for like 50 bucks in today's market right now. You know, you can take a $50 female and turn it into a slight damage or just something that's not appealing, you know, compared to, you know, something like this. And it's all in the handling. Get the saddle off, make sure it's completely dry before you put it in the fur bag. And you see what I mean about the ears? You know, it's just a little tip to get it to look a little better. And like he had the right idea, you know, he took the lip off, but he probably took it off the board a little early, and there was still moisture in it, and he definitely didn't flesh it. When I put my hand inside, it comes out. You can see it's all oily. Whereas if you put your hand inside of the ones that I flesh, you don't ever get the same amount of oil out of it that you do. And sometimes, especially on the big dogs, the grease will actually drip out here, and you'll see it catching the fur at the base like that. So just something to watch out for. But you know, a fur comb makes and breaks the deal. So you know, I keep trying to tell people it's no extra effort to brush things up a little bit and make them look good, rather than, you know, just throw it in a fur bag and then it ends up looking like this sort of thing. So there you go. Handling 101. Okay, so I went in my pile of fish here to grab a few to show you the do's and the don'ts. So here's one that's way too wide. You know, it should be more along that width, and it doesn't give you a nice presentation. Okay, left the legs sticking out on the thing and the bottom lip on. So legs inside, bottom lip off, way too wide. This one, pretty good job, except left the legs sticking out. Okay. This one's a good one. This one is what I call like a scud. So they never took the saddle off. So if you look here closely, that thing is full of grease. It'll never stop dripping, and it's almost like a form of damage. See how when I try to roll it, there's no crinkle? I know right away the saddle's not off it. This one, way too wide. So you see the big dogs, sometimes the guys will want to put them on a bigger board because they're so wide. That's why I recommend using a 5 1/4 inch fox board, and you'll see it makes quite a difference. Here's another one that's got nothing going for it. You know, it's kind of woolly, but took it off the board way too early, so it didn't dry properly, and the saddle's still on it. So the inside of here is just full of grease, just full of grease. It can actually burn the fur, so not a recommended way to put up a fisher. This one, they put the wedge at the bottom, and you can see how wide it is. So that's why I always recommend to put the wedge at the top. But again, they took it off a bit too early, and the head went all crooked and sideways on it. Okay. Another one that's a bit too wide, legs sticking on the outside. You don't want that. They knew enough to take the bottom lip off, but for some reason they weren't comfortable putting the legs inside. Here's another one that's way too wide. Okay. So let's just grab one of mine here. So same animal basically, but different put up. So you're looking, if you've got the old wide boards, I highly recommend you go to the narrow boards. 5 inches wide for the female, 5 1/4 inch wide for the males. And so again, if you don't take that saddle off, that's what will happen when it gets inside of a fur bag. It's all crinkly and stays like that. If you leave the saddle on like that, there's always going to be grease coming out the bottom. So those are just things to watch for. And like, as soon as I put my hand on a pelt, I can tell like this one's been fleshed. Okay, and I grab this one, and then I know right away, as soon as I touch it, I know it hasn't been fleshed properly. So fleshing is important because you want to get that saddle off that oily fat membrane that's underneath the saddle. That's what's got to come off. So, okay. So my do's and my don't pile here. You're looking for consistency in the put up. Okay. Feet opposite of the tail. Okay. Your tail's on one side of the board. Your feet are on the other. And don't pull the legs for length. You don't need to do that. You just pin them out. As soon as they're snug, you just pin them out. Front legs inside, bottom lip cut off. Make sure you're using a fur comb. You know, I can't emphasize enough to guys, just as this is a dog slicker brush. Present the fur in the best possible way all the time, and you're going to get, you'll end up making more money for it. You know, just a regular dog comb, anything that's going to give you a chance to brush it out. You know. And away you go. It's going to make a lot nicer looking pelt for it. So, just in closing, fisher is an animal that's getting, especially in Ontario here, we're getting more and more of them because of clear-cut logging and the way that we use the land now in the north. We have monoculture, and these fish do very well in a young forest. The marten don't do as well in a young forest. They have to have that canopy cover. The fish they're a bigger animal, a better hunter, and they don't need it. Just, you know, keep in mind a few handling tastes, but every fisher needs to be fleshed. And if you don't, you know, it's a downgrade for you. So you don't understand what's going on, but there's a big layer of fat that's left inside the fisher, and it actually can depending on how long it takes to get to the dressing plant, it can damage the fur. It can burn the skin. So fisher have to be fleshed. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I put these out just to try to give the guys some tips to try to make more money off their fur. There's a lot of more details I could go into in handling and whatnot, but I just always want to try to give you guys the general handling and understanding of the pelts that you're working with to try to maximize the return that you can get for your skins. All right, see you in the next one.